many of us face different kinds of concerns and issues in our workplace, like discrimination, harassment. What's the culture like? What about safety? And what does workers' compensation cover if you were to get injured at work? Well, we're joined today by Nicole Patino of the law offices. Nicole Patino, Gabe Snyder of Ward Black Law. We're discussing these kinds of topics and rules and regulations in the office. They're also taking your questions. So instead of wondering what the answer is to what's going on with your workplace issue, ask one of the experts. You can text them 336-379-5775 and you'll get your answer here live on TV. Okay, so Nicole, let's talk about this. What happens if someone believes that they were wrongfully terminated? What should they do?
So it depends on why that person believes that they were wrongfully terminated. If you believe that the reason that your employment was terminated is because you were discriminated against for a protected characteristic like race, religion, ethnic origin, disability, something like that, or if it's because you reported protected activity in the workplace, you could have been wrongfully terminated. So I would encourage you to reach out to an attorney.
So let's clear up maybe a little bit, because a lot of people would say, well, they just told me that I just wasn't doing enough, and so they just fired me, and I don't think that's fair.
Sure, and fair is not a law, so unfair is not unlawful. But if there is something that led up to it, for example, if you were one of 5 women who were all dismissed, or if you were over 40 and everybody else who was dismissed was over 40, or if you had complained because you were being sexually harassed in the workplace, those reasons, even if they tell you it's for a different reason, may be protected.
Gotcha, and you should talk to a lawyer about that. Okay, so Gabe, let's talk about workers' comp, and what does workers' compensation pay for?
Yeah, so workers' compensation pays for medical expenses if you've had a workplace accident related to that accident. And then also it pays you for time out of work. So it pays you 2/3 of your average weekly wage. That's because there's no taxes that you have to pay. When you get your checks, there's no taxes on that. So there's some of the kind of nuanced things that medical expenses can cover. They can cover round trips over 20 miles to and from medical providers and certain things like that.
Okay, yeah, we had that whole list on there so that people could look at that graphic as well and kind of read as you went by. Here's a question that kind of follows up with that. What about if you're responsible for your own injury while working? Does workers' compensation still cover that?
It's a great question. So workers' compensation is considered no fault, which means we're not looking for the employer to be at fault. We're not looking for whether the client was at fault. So even if the employee was the person who was at fault, let's say they had been told by the employer not to run down the hallway because it's slippery. If they did that, it's still considered an accident unless they intentionally were trying to get injured, of course. So all in workers' comp you have to have is an injury while in the course and scope of employment, meaning you're doing your job, and there's an accident, meaning an unforeseen event. So when I get clients that call me, they're like, well, look how bad my employer is. They did this and they did that. And I unfortunately have to go, it actually doesn't matter, just as we're looking to whether there was an accident.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So, Nicole, let's get back to workplace issues, especially when it comes to like harassment. So it's one thing if your boss is harassing you or another coworker is harassing you. I want you to kind of talk about who do you go to with, and then I want you to talk to me about who do you go to when it's the HR person who's maybe harassing you.
Right. So if it is a coworker, you want to report either to an immediate supervisor or to HR. If it's your immediate supervisor, so your boss, go to HR, or your employee handbook probably has a policy that tells you how to report. So there should be a bypass procedure so that you don't have to report to the person who's committing the harassment. And the same would apply if it's someone with HR. So you would want to talk to someone who is higher in the chain of command who can listen to your complaint. The important part is to make sure that you're reporting that complaint.
Okay. What about like dating in the workplace? Is dating in the workplace allowed?
It depends on the workplace. So it could be. The tricky issue becomes or arises when it's a subordinate, so and a manager or supervisor. So if you're on a different level, some concerns are raised and the employer may put the kibosh on the relationship.
Okay. All right. And what happens if like a boss does actually ask somebody out on a date, you say no, and then now your hours are being cut? What would you do in that situation?
So that sounds like quid pro quo sexual harassment, and that's something that you would want to report to HR. And we've talked about all these different places and ways to report. If you report and the employer takes some adverse action against you, so they cut your hours, they demote you, they dismiss you, or put you on an unpaid suspension for an undetermined amount, you may have a retaliation claim as well.
Okay. All right. Gabe, when it comes to workers' comp, I think a lot of people want to know, do they get to choose their doctor, and what should they do at the very beginning, like when the injury happens?
Oh, that's a great question. So the first thing you want to do when an accident happens is report it to your employer, report it to your HR rep. It would be somebody that you would recognize, either a job site supervisor or somebody who's in HR. As far as the doctor, it's actually one of the things that the employer gets to control. So after you have a workplace accident, they usually have kind of their own setup with either an urgent care or somewhere else that they'll send you. And the employer has the right to direct medical treatment. And what that means is they have the right to tell you where to go. But that doesn't mean that they can communicate to your doctor without you or alone. So they can write for letters, and it's got to be sent to you, and then the return letter back from the doctor stating what his or her opinions are, has to be returned back to you. It's considered a medical record. So the only caveat to that is if you do not like the medical treatment that you're receiving and you have a bad relationship with the doctor, let's say, you are entitled to a second opinion. And that's something that you sometimes have to fight over, you sometimes need an attorney for, but you are entitled to a second opinion of a doctor of your choosing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that doctor is going to take over and become the treating physician, if that makes sense.
Okay, and I do have a follow-up question about when you said you do have to let your HR person or your manager know. Do you have to let them know, like, by email, by text, does it have to be written down somewhere?
So the rule technically says that within 30 days, you're reported to your employer in writing. There's been some Court of Appeals cases that have kind of abolished that and affect you. So yes, it's best to get it in writing. I would do it in email. I would do it in text. I would do it by carrier pigeon if that's what it takes to get it in writing. Do everything that you can, but we can get out of it if there's an issue with notice on that. So.
Well, that kind of like stops the whole he said, she said, you didn't tell us, whatever, right?
That's exactly right. And what happens is normally, even if you verbally tell your HR representative or your job site supervisor, as it may be, they will end up writing it down, right? So then you have a written notice, right?
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
But yeah, always try and get it in writing if you can.
Okay. All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break. I've got a whole bunch of questions here already. You can get your question in 336-379-5775. We'll be right back.